Hello and welcome to IAMC Radio and Podcast.
It's great to be here.
Today we're going to explore the top news headlines for April 16th, 2025.
Yes, quite a few significant events happening globally. We've gathered updates from various places.
Okay, let's jump right in. First up, Europe. Finland's border with Russia.
That's right. Finland has confirmed that its eastern border, the one with Russia, is going to remain closed indefinitely.
Indefinitely. Wow. This goes back to late 2023, doesn't it?
It does. It started around December 2023. The initial trigger was about 1,000 migrants arriving without visas.
And Finland believes Russia was behind that.
Exactly. Finland's position is that Russia orchestrated this surge. They call it instrumentalized migration. The Kremlin, of course, denies this.
So the main concern now is national security.
Pretty much. The Finnish government says the risk of this happening again, maybe even on a larger scale, is still likely. They see it as a threat to national security and public order.
So what happens to people seeking asylum at that border now?
Well, they're being redirected. Applications for international protection have to be made at other border crossings, not the eastern one.
There was also talk of a specific law, a pushback border law.
Yes, a temporary law. They were considering extending it. It essentially allows border guards, under certain conditions, to turn away asylum seekers directly at the border.
That sounds controversial.
It is. Experts have pointed out potential conflicts with international human rights commitments and even Finland's own constitution.
But the government feels it worked.
They believe the combination of the border closure and this temporary law did manage to stop the flow that started back in November 2023.
Okay, let's shift focus to the Middle East. The humanitarian situation in Gaza. Israel is continuing to block aid.
Yes, that's the official stance. Israel has stated it will continue blocking humanitarian aid from entering Gaza.
What's the reasoning given for that?
Defense Minister Israel Katz described it as a key pressure tactic against Hamas. The idea is to prevent Hamas from using the aid distribution as a tool.
So no aid is planned to go in anytime soon.
According to the statements, no plans or preparations are underway to allow aid into Gaza right now.
And Prime Minister Netanyahu?
He's emphasizing military pressure. He stated that's the only way, in his view, to secure the release of the hostages held by Hamas.
How are others reacting to this? The Palestinian authorities.
The Palestinian Foreign Ministry strongly denounced Netanyahu's visit to Gaza, calling it an effort to prolong what they term genocide and forced displacement. Very strong words.
And humanitarian organizations.
Doctors Without Borders painted a grim picture. They described Gaza as effectively a mass grave because of the military actions and the aid blockade. They say the humanitarian response is severely hampered by insecurity and just, well, massive supply shortages.
The UN has also raised alarms.
Yes. Just on Monday, the UN warned that Gaza is facing its most severe humanitarian crisis since the war began last October. Apparently, no supplies have reached the territory for a month and a half.
A month and a half. That means critical shortages.
Absolutely. Medical supplies, fuel, water, all running dangerously low or out completely.
Is there any international legal movement on this?
There is. The International Court of Justice, the ICJ, is set to open hearings on April 28th. They'll be looking specifically at Israel's humanitarian obligations towards Palestinians. This follows a UN General Assembly resolution asking for an advisory opinion.
But the violence continues on the ground.
Tragically, yes. There are reports of a recent Israeli pre-dawn airstrike in Gaza City that killed 11 people, including women and children.
And the overall death toll.
The Health Ministry in Hamas-run Gaza reports at least 1,652 people killed in this renewed phase of the assault. And since the war began, following Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, they report over 51,025 Palestinians killed. That initial attack by Hamas killed 12,218 people in Israel.
Such devastating numbers. Okay, let's move to Nigeria now. There's a video circulating involving police and Chinese nationals.
Yes, a video went viral showing mobile police officers known as Menalpiol who were attached to a Chinese mining company in Ogun State. The video shows them receiving cash handouts from Chinese nationals.
How did the Nigerian police respond?
They defended the officers. The official line is that the money was a form of appreciation from the company owner because the officers were credibly doing well in their duties.
Appreciation. So not a bribe or anything illicit?
That's the claim. There was also a police wireless message that seemed to support this. It mentioned the officers were attached to a specific company, AKK Frontier Risk Management, at an approved site.
And the message detailed the handout.
It said the company owner from China heard about the officers' good work, met them and other staff, and then a Chinese man and his wife distributed the money.
So, case closed.
Not quite. The unit commander has apparently been issued a query, and other officers involved were defaulted. There are also reports of efforts to find out who posted the video online.
Has anyone else commented?
Yes, human rights activist Omoyole Sowore condemned the act. And significantly, the Inspector General of Police has summoned some officers, including a DSP Alu Adejembi and his team, for questioning today, April 16th, regarding a similar video incident.
So it might be part of a pattern. Interesting. Now over to Mauritius. The former finance minister has been arrested again.
That's correct. Renganaden Padayachy, the ex-finance minister, was rearrested. This happened just 2 days after he was released on bail for a different case.
What's this new case about?
This latest arrest is tied to another fraud probe, this time involving alleged fraud against the Mauritius Investment Corporation, or MIC. It specifically relates to a payment of around $1 million to a polling company named Menlo Park's Ltd Pulse Analytics.
And they searched his properties.
Yes, the police searched 2 properties belonging to Padayachy as part of this new investigation.
You mentioned he was already out on bail. What was the first case?
The previous charge, also involving fraud and the MIC, was linked to the alleged artificial inflation of the valuation of a company called East Coast Hotel Investment. MIC had invested in it and reportedly lost about $6.7 million.
Is anyone else implicated?
Yes, Harvish Sigolem, who is the former governor of the Central Bank of Mauritius, he was also charged in that East Coast Hotel case. And interestingly, he was arrested and released on bail back in January related to this newer Menlo Park's Pulse Analytics case. So the cases seem somewhat intertwined.
Okay, back to West Africa. Nigeria has apparently reduced electricity supply to Niger Republic.
Yes, reports indicate Nigeria has cut its electricity exports to Niger, which is currently under junta rule. The supply has been reduced from 80 megawatts down to 46 megawatts. That's about a 42% reduction.
And this is causing problems in Niger.
It is. Niger Republic's energy minister, Hawa Amadou, confirmed this has led to power cuts in the capital, Niamey. Their own domestic electricity production has reportedly fallen quite sharply, somewhere between 30 and 50%, forcing the state utility, Nigelec, to impose planned outages.
Didn't Nigeria cut power to Niger before?
They did. Nigeria initially suspended most electricity exports last year as part of the ECOWAS sanctions against the military junta after the coup. It seems some supply resumed, but now it's been significantly reduced again.
Meanwhile, Nigeria's own power sector has issues, right?
Huge issues. Domestically, the power generation companies, the GenCos, are warning of a potential shutdown. They say they're owed a staggering amount, around N4 trillion, by the Nigerian government.
N4 trillion, that's massive.
It is. They claim N2 trillion is owed just for electricity supplied in 2024, plus another N1.9 trillion in legacy debts. They report receiving less than 30% of their monthly invoices.
So this could lead to blackouts in Nigeria itself.
That's the warning. They say this liquidity crisis could cause a total collapse of the electricity value chain and widespread blackouts. High taxes, regulatory fees, and foreign exchange volatility are apparently making things worse.
Staying with Nigeria, Peter Obi has made comments about President Tinubu's trip to France.
Yes, Peter Obi, who was the Labour Party's presidential candidate, has publicly urged President Bola Tinubu to suspend his retreat in France and come back to Nigeria.
Why the urgency?
Obi cited the ongoing insecurity. He pointed out that in the 2 weeks President Tinubu has been away, over 150 Nigerians have reportedly been killed due to insecurity, especially in Plateau and Zamfara states.
Any other issues mentioned?
He also mentioned repeated pipeline explosions in the Niger Delta and a resurgence of insurgency in Borno State. Obi basically called on the president to return and take responsibility, saying, the CEO of the troubled company called Nigeria is retreating to a faraway land in France.
How has the presidency responded?
Earlier, the presidency had dismissed claims that the trip was for medical reasons, insisting it was a working visit. Tinubu traveled on April 2nd, and his spokesperson indicated he's expected back in about a fortnight, so roughly around now or very soon.
Okay, let's turn to the U.S. now. There are reports about international student visas being revoked.
Yes, the U.S. government has reportedly started revoking visas for a number of international students. The figure mentioned is around 600 students from over 90 different institutions.
Which students are mainly affected?
Reports suggest many are from India and China. Importantly, there have been no reports yet of Nigerian students being affected. The Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, NIDCOM, also stated they haven't received any complaints from Nigerian students about this.
What types of visas are involved?
Primarily F1 visas, which are for full-time academic study, and J1 visas, used for exchange programs. It's worth noting, J1 visa holders are generally expected to leave the U.S. within 30 days after their program ends.
What's the reason given for the revocations?
U.S. State Department officials have reportedly accused some students of being involved in protests or political activism. They're citing the U.S. Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952.
And that act allows for deportation based on?
Based on their presence potentially having serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the U.S.
Has this been confirmed?
Secretary of State Marco Rubio did confirm visa revocations are happening, stating the State Department revokes visas daily for individuals involved in political activism. Some immigration attorneys see this as part of a broader immigration crackdown.
Are the students challenging this?
Some have filed lawsuits against the administration, alleging a violation of due process. Some also argue they're being targeted for, minor or very old infractions.
Any other advice being given to students?
Yes, some colleges have reportedly advised international students maybe to postpone travel plans. This is due to the risk of deportation related to a new travel ban imposed in March, though that ban affects 43 countries, not including Nigeria.
Right. Okay, finally, a significant ruling from the UK Supreme Court regarding transgender women.
Yes, a major decision. The UK Supreme Court has ruled that transgender women, even if they possess a gender recognition certificate, GRC, are not legally defined as woman under the Equality Act 2010.
This came from a legal challenge.
It did. It was triggered by a challenge from a gender-critical group called For Women Scotland, or FWS. They argued that the term woman in the Equality Act should be interpreted based on biological sex, not self-identification or legal paperwork. Figures like J.K. Rowling supported their stance.
What was the counter-argument?
The Scottish government argued that the Gender Recognition Act of 2004 legally changes an individual's sex for all purposes, meaning someone with a GRC should be legally considered a woman under the Equality Act, too.
So what was the Supreme Court's core reasoning for their decision?
The primary concerns seem to be about practical problems. They felt that treating trans women as legally female for all purposes under the Equality Act would create significant issues in applying the law.
Can you elaborate on those practical problems?
The court ruled that sex, man, and woman in the Equality Act refers specifically to biological sex. They argued other interpretations would make the act incoherent and impracticable. For instance, they noted protections specifically for pregnant women would be undermined without a biological definition.
Did they mention other areas?
Yes. They also found that considering trans women with GRCs as having, quote, female certificated sex would clash with the definitions in the act and could weaken protections based on sexual orientation, like, for example, lesbian-only spaces.
Any other examples cited?
The ruling also mentioned potential confusion and impracticability for single-sex associations, rules around women's sports participation, the public sector equality duty, and even regulations concerning the armed forces.
How has the UK government reacted?
They welcomed the ruling. They stated it provides clarity and reaffirmed their support for single-sex spaces being based on biological sex. This is certainly a ruling with potentially far-reaching implications for trans rights in the UK.
Absolutely. That covers a lot of ground. Thank you for breaking down these complex headlines for us today.
You're welcome. It's certainly a busy news day with significant developments across the board.
Thank you for listening to today's top news headlines on IAMC Radio and Podcast.